Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Executive of the 15th of October. My name is Councillor Paul Follows, and I'm Leader of the Council and Chair of the Executive, and this meeting is being held in the Council Chamber at the Berries in Godalming and, of course, webcast live. The agenda was published on the 7th of October, so in good notice for everybody to read it. I will flag in advance, not quite as bad as the departed Liz Townsend, who's given her apologies for cold and flu. I'm about a day in front of her, so if I lose my voice, I apologise, and I will do as I can to speak less than normal, which I know will surprise all of you a great deal. Number one, apologies for absence, Ben.
Thank you, Leader. We have apologies for absence from Councillor Townsend this evening.
Thank you. Can I have your approval, executive members, to sign the minutes of the 3rd of September 2024? Thank you. Declarations. Any declarations, anyone? Any received before?
There were none.
And none from the floor. Okay. Questions from members of the public. I believe there were no questions received.
There were none.
And questions from members. I don't believe there were any received either.
There were none.
Thank you. In which case, moving on to updates from me. I only have one particular update this week, and I'm going to try and keep my ire to a minimum on the subject. We have been informed, the council in general, as have all of the boroughs and districts of Surrey, that the family support programme, which Surrey runs and is pays for and is run by the districts and boroughs, is being terminated at the end of April 2025. We don't know yet whether the funding that they get has been cut by the government. It doesn't seem to be the case, but they have told us in advance that they are cutting the programme from April 2025. At the very same time that Tim Oliver was using the words "no one left behind" in full council at Surrey, this was being communicated to the boroughs and districts. That impacts something like 250 families across Guildford and Waverley, many of which are at the top end of vulnerable or complicated types of cases. This is a service that has a waiting list of, I think, 42 families in our area alone. And of course, has gone alongside the cuts that have already happened to the family centres across Waverley. I'm just thinking of the one in my own ward in particular, which was cut by 58% and now has to deal with an area pretty much the size of Western Waverley, when previously it was dealing with parts of Godalming on its own. So this is not the first of these cuts, and I'm sure it won't be the last. But I will again be communicating in my county capacity that their lack of ability to consult with the districts and boroughs on something so fundamental as this is absolutely unacceptable, and we are still waiting to hear what their intended replacement for this service is. We're obviously working with the other boroughs and districts to establish the impact to make sure the county fully understands what they've done here. It is my hope that they have done some impact assessments of their own before they took this decision, but I will await to see that. In order to not issue any more vitriol at the council, at the county council, I am now going to hand over to those who have let me know in advance they want to add something tonight. So the first one is Councillor Mark Merriweather.
Thank you, Leader. The 2025-26 budgeting cycle is now in full swing, with a dozen or so challenge boards where the finance team and others, including assistant directors, meet together to discuss their current budgets and resources, their plans, revenue and capital spending over the next coming year and over the medium-term financial period. We've finished some finance, assets and property, organisation development, regen and commercial services, but some of the biggest hitters for housing in particular, planning, communications, customer services are still to come. There are no surprises. It's an extremely sobering landscape at the moment. Not just because of inflation, but other budgetary pressures. And we are in for a very challenging few weeks as we try to identify measures to balance our budget by February.
And the situation that we were in, where we all thought it prudent to make sure that we could manage our own house and not be reliant on any change of government to deliver any serious alterations to local government funding, has proven once again to be a sensible position to take.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly. So, we're still in a position where we won't actually know what the government is going to settle on us financially for 2025-26 until Christmas, maybe at the earliest. We will have a rush to digest that. but the indications are rather scarily that we're not going to get much more, if anything, than we got under the previous government, and we might actually get less.
Victoria.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to make the announcement that following the approvals by Council at both Waverley and Guildford, we have had a post created of Joint Assistant Director of Legal Services and Information Governance. Following a recruitment process involving a number of strong candidates, we are delighted to appoint Claire Beasley. Claire has been recruited to this joint role from her post as Guildford Borough Council's Legal Services Manager. We wish her every success in this important role for both of our authorities.
Thank you, Victoria. Paul Rivers. Did you want to speak? Yeah.
Thank you, Leader, and very smart haircut, if I may say so. I've got and so can we, yes. I have a few things to say about housing operations tonight, so bear with me. Firstly, on the Executive Working Group, looking at a review of responsive repairs. Now, we are all aware that we need to improve the quality of our repairs and our maintenance service. We created an executive working group to review and comment on the performance information provided on the repairs contractor, Ian Williams. Ian Williams' current performance has not been acceptable for some time, and we are taking action to improve services to their expected levels and, importantly, to increase tenant satisfaction. We completed the review earlier this summer, and the Landlord Services Advisory Board has seen some of that and will continue to see that going forward. Ian Williams responded to the review by changing its management structure and its team working at Waverley. And they have developed their own improvement plan with promises to increase tenant satisfaction. Our housing team has also developed an improvement action plan, which will be reporting to the LSAB at the end of this month and onwards with further monthly updates. I've chosen the word cement because that's a building term to enforce these improvement plans. And as part of that, a contractor client away day was held some time ago to focus on improving performance and support with partnership working. So we have been working very hard, and certainly our officers have, to bring Ian Williams up to date. It's a challenge, and it's a challenge that we accept, and we will work hard to improve not only for ourselves and our houses, but primarily for our tenants. Now, a little word on the regulator of social housing inspections. Back in April, 1st of April this year, we saw the adoption of the regulator of social housing consumer standards. And as part of that, there is a new inspection regime for all registered housing providers, of which we are one. As part of that, we will receive inspection visits from the regulator at least once every 4 years. And this inspection program is an important part of the new regulatory approach that has been delivered by the RSH. Our regulator can proactively seek evidence that a landlord is delivering the required consumer standard outcomes. And this, as they say, and rightly so, will help to drive long-term improvements for the benefits of our tenants. Now, colleagues, Waverley is part of the second cohort of planned inspections, which is now. We welcome this inspection, and we are open to the scrutiny that it will bring and the findings that it will deliver to provide us with continuous improvements in our service, in our housing service. Our great housing team have started engagement with the inspection team with the submission of documents last week, a magnificent effort, which we all are very grateful for and give you great thanks for doing so. What an effort. The inspection will carry on and includes ongoing requests and review of evidence, interviews with key members, and the observation of meetings. The final report and grading is expected in January next year, January 2025. And so, as part of that, we welcome the regulatory inspection team to this evening's executive meeting. So I trust we're all going to be on our best behaviour. Promise? Right. Lastly, Thursday, 24th of October at 7 p.m. here is the Tenants Panel AGM. Some of us were there this time last year, and it's well worth going again. And I encourage colleagues to promote the Tenants Panel AGM to your constituents who are also Waverley tenants. The Tenants Panel is a strong and independent voice for all Waverley tenants. They gain views regarding service delivery, they share feedback and make suggestions for improvement. Joining the Tenants Panel is a great way for people to get more involved in the local community and the housing service itself. Terry Daubney chairs the Tenants Panel, and he also shares the chair at our Landlord Services Advisory Board. And I strongly promote the AGM because you do hear some very interesting stuff. So, if I may say so, see you all there. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. And the Central Comms team are going to be sending out reminders of that AGM as well, because I mean, in a parallel situation to party political recruitment of new candidates when elections come round, it's trying to make sure that people of all different demographics can actually access it. So, I mean, we need to try and encourage them where we can to help. And yes, of course, the RSH are observing this meeting, and in true quantum physics style, I'm sure that won't have any impact upon how the meeting goes or how we act. So we'll just need to make sure we try and just be our normal selves nonetheless. At that point, I'll head to Janet.
Thank you very much, Leader. I shall try to be very, very normal. I'm delighted to tell you that more tenants have now moved into Oxford Ridge. You'll be aware, no doubt, that we have 7 deep retrofit homes, and all 7 are now occupied. These homes have been part of a green technology pilot and have air source heat pumps, solar panels, new AA rated double glazing and doors, and additional internal and external insulation. These collective energy efficiency measures will benefit tenants, but will also have a wider positive environmental impact through the reduction in carbon emissions. I think there's a guidebook to go with how to use your house, which is obviously going to be essential reading for anybody living in them. By using a local lettings plan and focusing on right sizing, we've also been able to maximise the use of these homes. For example, the development includes a bespoke home to meet the needs of a disabled tenant, and additional family homes, and the contractor supported the creation of a reflections garden in the neighbouring Eashing Cemetery, all for the benefit of the local community. We've had a considerable amount of press interest in this scheme, very well deserved, and a press event was taken to the scheme to showcase the development. And that included, by the way, the Lord Lieutenant of Surrey, who visited the development and was very impressed with the quality of homes and energy efficiency measures. And in particular, he met with some of the tenants who had been relocated during the redevelopment or replacement of their homes in Oxford Ridge, and who had appeared in this amazing video called Keeping Memories Alive project. If anybody hasn't seen it, I really do recommend they watch it. It's absolutely extraordinary. It's very moving, in fact, as well. And it's just not easy leaving a home and garden where you've lived for many, many years and cared for the garden for decades, possibly, to be relocated for many months before you can move back into a brand new home, no matter how good it is. So I think that's very much to be taken on board. I just want to say a huge well done to the team who made all this possible. I think they really need to feel very, very proud of themselves. And finally, following a successful local authority housing fund application to obtain housing for those who are unable to find settled accommodation on Ukrainian and Afghan resettlement schemes, we have bought 4 open market homes and funded 4 two-bedroomed homes at Oxford Ridge. This is an excellent central government initiative with reduced assessment criteria and data monitoring, and that has helped us increase the number of council homes quickly and efficiently. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Janet. And as Victoria and I are the 2 ward members for Oxford Ridge, I will just say again, thank you to the team that has delivered those. They are, as somebody who grew up in social housing, I can attest they are fantastic. And I don't think you would ever know that they are social houses. The fact that some of those houses are nearly 100 years old and have been brought from a less than EPC-D rating in some cases now into A or better is frankly staggering. But when you see them, you do see the quality that's gone into it. And as I'm sure we'll discuss later, that will inform some of the other decision making that we hope to make with or without the assistance of the state going forward in that domain. Right. And finally, I think Steve.
Thanks. And again, I could wax lyrical about those 7 homes, having visited them recently, and it is very impressive. And the lessons that can be learned from those homes about efficient retrofitting, I think, are immense. I'll be fairly brief because you'll be hearing from me later in connection with the climate emergency, the climate change and sustainability strategy, and the annual update to the carbon neutrality action plan. But we may potentially be aware of the recent announcement from the government that has pledged nearly £22 billion to fund projects that capture greenhouse gases from polluting plants and store them underground to reduce carbon emissions, what we call carbon capture, utilisation and storage. And while many of us on the executive, I think, would commend the efforts of the new government to take action in pursuit of UK climate targets, some of us feel that the focus on carbon capture, utilisation and storage is misdirected. We are therefore proposing a motion for debate at full council next week, calling on the government to reconsider the use of funding towards climate-related projects utilising known technologies that will provide significant reductions in the carbon footprint, including, for example, what we have found to be highly effective, which is subsidies for the insulation and retrofitting of homes to improve their energy and efficiency and to reduce bills, and the provision of additional financial support to councils in order to enable them to retrofit their housing stock and build to the highest standards of energy efficiency. And I think this is a particularly important issue for councils like ours that have declared a climate emergency and are on a net zero carbon trajectory. And I look forward to the debate at full council next week on that subject.
And apologies, Speaker, I didn't get a chance to ask you before. Did you want to add anything?
Thank you, Leader. Just quickly, Museum of Farnham, as we know, we had a bit of a business going on with that over the week, but we've managed to sort that out, hopefully. But meanwhile, the contractor's now been chosen and appointed, so the work will start soon, with the first element being the erection of the new scaffold tower. And that means that they will allow brick measurements to be taken, allow the bricks to be created off-site, and assessments of the higher part of the building to be made. And we'll be launching our Buy a Brick campaign for Wilmer House, which we hope will grab the public's attention. And the Edge, Surrey County Council have now appointed a consultancy, SLC, to review the operation options for the site with the objective of bringing forward proposals for consideration later this year. Waverley are fully participating in the project with the objective of securing community use in any future operation. In the meantime, WHSA continue to oversee the bookings at the site and support the large number of clubs using the facility. And that's all going well as far as we know. Thanks very much.
I think considering Surrey's current penchant for unilateral action on some of these things, we're going to have to keep an even closer eye on the Edge than we previously were, just to make sure that their intentions remain as they are. But otherwise, yes, I'm hoping all of the exec will be posing for an incredibly cliche picture when we all buy a brick for the museum. There will be plenty of people who said that it was impossible to get to where we were with the Edge, and it would be nice to literally put something down to prove otherwise. Right, at that point then, we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 7, recommendations from overview and scrutiny committees. There are no specific recommendations, but I will highlight Appendix 2 of the corporate strategy report. So my thanks to Jenny and some of the other members of the council's staff who have contributed to the replies. We've really tried to respond to every comment or question that was made from the joint ONS in regards to the corporate strategy. So we've hopefully provided an answer to everything that was mentioned. If there is anything, of course, I'm sure the chairs of those committees will let us know, and we'll discuss at full council as well. But we've really tried to make sure everything, comment or question alike, was taken on board, and some level of response was given. So thank you for all those who helped draft the quite lengthy responses that kind of thing required. In which case then we go on to item 8, the interim approach to creating joint posts, which I'll be handing over to Councillor Keele to introduce.
Thank you, Leader. I am pleased to present this paper, which supports our collaborative working by creating an interim approach to creating joint posts between Waverley Borough Council and Guildford Borough Council. This paper is a really crucial one for allowing the approved restructures in our legal and democratic services and in other teams to be realised. There are a number of recommendations for us to consider as an executive tonight, and some on the pay policy, which once we've reviewed them here will go on to full council. Just to highlight, there are some slight amendments to those that you will see in your papers, which remove some typographical errors referring to certain paragraphs that didn't exist. As we are hopefully all aware by now, the purpose of our collaboration is to allow us to reduce our costs and improve our outcomes for our residents. This approach to our joint roles enables savings to be made by reducing the payments of salaries for 2 separate roles down to 1. But savings aren't the only benefit of this approach. Joint posts can improve our resilience, reduce our risks, and help us to streamline our service delivery and therefore, as we hope, the experience of our residents. While we of course need to harmonise our working practices in the longer term, we also need to be able to respond in an agile way to short-term pressures to create joint roles between the 2 councils where it is evidence that it is needed. These longer-term discussions need to involve our harmonisation of working practices across both of the councils, but sometimes we will need to implement joint roles ahead of this work where there is an urgent and evidence-based need. So these policies, processes and systems will ensure that we can do this in a consistent way and create the governance for this to be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Victoria. Any comments, questions, anybody? Mark? I'll come to you.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Keele. I just wanted to register that a lot of the discussion about collaboration is about human resources and financial resources. But I just wanted to register the point that for me, the collaboration is about more than that. It is part of our commitment to continuous improvement. And outside of the human and the financial resources, we benefit just by comparing our other policies and procedures and levelling up, for want of a better phrase, to better practice and best practice. And we're already seeing, I think it's fair to say, across both councils, the benefit of seeing how each other works and making sure that we cherry pick the best practices going forward.
And we need to move beyond the kind of section 113 ad hoc arrangements that we've been operating on in some areas for some time. And then this moves us to a much more stable situation for that. Tony.
Thank you, Leader. Victoria, this might be a slightly unfair question, but I shall raise it anyway. As the portfolio holder for regulatory services, my team have been something of a trailblazer for this joint initiative with our off-street parking enforcement team, which has so far proved to be very successful. And with that in mind, I'm just wondering what other plans are in the pipeline. Where do you see this going next? Where are the next sort of areas where we can see joint working coming in?
Thank you, Tony, and also Mark. Mark, I completely agree that we have a lot to learn from our partners, and being able to draw on the skills and experience of both councils is to mutual benefit. Tony, regulatory services has been incredibly successful so far with the off-street parking enforcement, and we'll keep that obviously reviewed as time goes on. I think, there is no limit to where we can go with this, but we need to make sure we're taking it at incremental steps in order to be able to put the right processes in place. This gives us an interim approach at the moment, but I'm sure that as time goes on, we will seek to explore other areas of collaboration where it makes sense for both councils to come together. So the limit is our own imagination, I would say.
I mean, there are definitely departments where certainly legal democratic, which is the area that we're looking at, and a lot of this makes a great deal of sense. But then the other areas where we've got large scale similarities with Guildford. I mean, housing is definitely a no-brainer on this. We're both running 5,000 or so houses. There is definitely skills shortages in different areas of both councils. So being able to alleviate some of that through this sort of working seems to me to be a logical place for us to go. So I think, as you say, this is this sets the scene for further integration in a positive sense later in other areas. I think we'll see when local partnerships report in a few weeks. I imagine we'll see the scale of the potential benefits that at the moment we're probably leaving on the table. So I'm hoping that this is the first of these sorts of papers coming along in short order. So any further comments, anyone? No, in which case I'm going to effectively ask to move the recommendations, which are the same, but just to exclude some of the references to report paragraph numbers so that they're accurate. This is my advice to my right. Can I have all those in favour of the recommendations, please show? Thank you very much, everyone. Right, item 9, the corporate strategy. Victoria's going to do the lion's share of the talking on this, because otherwise I'm going to start coughing in front of everybody. But I do want to take this opportunity to thank particularly Robin and Jenny and Robin's team for all of the work that they have done. I also want to thank all of the exec members for the various interactions that we've had on this over the past few months, and to every single member of staff in the senior team and their direct reports for getting this into the position it's in. I also want to actually take the opportunity to thank the ONS and the rest of the membership of the council for constructively feeding back on this process in the way that they have done. I think it's made it a better document. There are things that, once we've looked at it for the 30th, 40th, 50th time, you will, as a human being, miss, irrelevant of anything else. But I mean, more importantly, is also just looking at what this strategy does. I mean, for those of you that follow the politics, this isn't a document that will cause anybody a great deal of surprise in terms of the things that it's trying to do. A more sustainable borough, a more prosperous borough, a more inclusive borough, decent and affordable homes, and a resilient and well-managed council. These are the reality of the manifesto that most of this administration ran on when we sought re-election in 2023, and tries to make real the things that we pledged to the electorate in this borough, and to make those values that we stood on and represent here in this room real in terms of the council's budget process and in terms of the things that we actually deliver. There is a lot that comes after this in terms of engagement with further stakeholders. We want to do some more detailed engagement with residents and with tenants. to make some of these things a bit more live for them as we go forward. But these are things that we think are necessary for the development of Waverley across the board. To remind everybody that when we're here in this place, we are all Waverley councillors. We are all from a particular part of Waverley, but we here represent the prosperity and economy and sustainability of the whole place. And in this case, the place is Waverley. I do want to draw attention to a few of the points in here. When we're talking about a more prosperous borough, that's not prosperous at any cost. That's making sure that we have a conception of economics that is in line with the ideals in which we stood. When we're talking about decent and affordable homes, we don't mean what the government mean on affordable homes. We mean making sure that there are homes that people can actually really afford. It's taking account to the needs of the borough. It's taking account of the needs of our tenants, and it's making sure that we manage rent and we manage all of those processes around it. When we talk about a more sustainable borough, we're making sure that when we have our climate emergency and the plans that go with it, those things are costed and reasonable and deliverable, and that we make sure that we aren't siloing climate change somewhere on its own, and we're making sure that that delivers across the council, because in doing that, we deliver benefits in lots of different ways, both financial and otherwise. And like all boroughs and districts and counties and parishes and towns, a resilient and well-managed council is something that is not a luxury anymore. We know that support from government is unlikely to be coming down the pipe anytime soon. We know that where services are being run by the county, that they could literally be cut the next day, and we will have to then deal with the fallout from that. So making sure that we've got our own house in order and making sure that we can help people as much as possible on the front line is something that we can do. It's also making sure that we work with our partners in a way that we would like to be worked with ourselves. And it's treating those partners with decency and respect, and understanding that the work they do is important, and that they are also our residents and constituents too. So there are lots of things in here that I absolutely commend. The presentation, I think, is excellent. We're making sure that all of the parts of the borough are properly represented in this document, and there are things that apply everywhere. We've got case studies that outline some of the things that we mean, so it's clear where we might be using some slightly more councillor language and jargon, that it will be clear what we intend by this. And of course, what will follow is then the delivery plan and some of the more detailed governance behind this that comes next, which I know is already in train, awaiting the approval from council. But as I'm about to start coughing, I'm now going to hand over to Victoria.
Thank you, Leader. I feel you've covered actually quite a lot of it there. So I'm absolutely delighted to present before you a final draft of our corporate strategy, which I think is an absolutely wonderful example of collaborative working. I would also like to add my thanks to the whole team who've supported so diligently on this, which have included staff from Waverley and Guildford, notably Robin Taylor, Jenny Sturgis and Luke Harvey, and of course the direction and support for the process from our CEO. I would also like to thank our councillor colleagues at Guildford who've met with us informally to discuss our ambitions for our two authorities and how we can work together on areas to achieve them. I would also like to echo the words of the Leader to thank our executive here for all of their work and attention to detail, and for bringing their expertise on their particular policy areas. I'm very pleased that this has gone through a robust process with a joint meeting of our two overview and scrutiny committees, who've made a number of suggestions and asked the right questions to help us develop the document further. As the Leader has outlined, these have been responded to, we hope, in full. We hope that that's covered everything off, but do let us know if it hasn't, and that's in the annex to this document. This input was really valuable for us in testing out the priorities, and by putting it in front of a wider group of members, I hope this has ensured that the document reflects the whole borough and its geography and local needs. So thank you to all scrutiny members for taking the time to engage with this so constructively. The next steps are to take this paper to council next week, which hopefully, should it be adopted, we will then take the ambitions that we have outlined here, develop a delivery plan, which will be worked up with our stakeholders and staff in the coming months. I'm sure that a few of our portfolio holders may wish to speak on their own areas within this document, so I'm not going to dwell on the different priorities. They're all in front of you. Safe to say I'm very pleased personally that we have a firm priority on being a resilient and well-managed council. The outcomes in this section will ensure that we are delivering value for money for our residents with a firm constitutional underpinning by having strong and effective governance. The collaboration has already been touched upon a number of times this evening, and here we reaffirm our commitments and our ambition for that. I'm really keen that we explore ways of engaging with our residents on our plans and that we are committed to recruiting and retaining a skilled workforce. So I'm looking forward to our discussions tonight and next week and its hopeful adoption as our new corporate strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Steve.
Yes, thank you. Very much welcome this. I have the recollection of sitting down with Andy MacLeod years ago and drafting the first draft of the previous corporate strategy. And I can remember the process that we went through then. And the outcome, I think, was good as far as it goes. But it was put together rather quickly in order to give the previous administration a clear steer, particularly in the context of significant changes in direction at that time, and not least the declaration of a climate emergency back in 2019. However, as I say, I think this is a real step up. This one has taken more time because it is more measured and because it needed to be more closely aligned to the commitments on political direction that were made at the time of last year's local elections. It retains the concept of addressing the climate emergency, and I'm delighted that priority one is about a more sustainable borough. But as we've always made clear, that doesn't exist in isolation. Tackling the climate and ecological emergency is not one-dimensional. And, you know, it is genuinely true, in my view, that you cannot have climate justice without social justice, so that we need to make sure that the burden falls on the broadest shoulders and the benefits accrue to those that are most in need. So for me, the priority on which I lead in terms of sustainability is contingent not just on the resilient and well-managed council on which all priorities hinge, but a more prosperous borough building a greener economy, a more inclusive borough supporting those in greatest need, and decent and affordable homes, and homes that are warmer, energy efficient homes for our tenants. So I think our new corporate strategy is also set to become an exercise in engagement. And I'm excited by the notion that it will be shared with partners who will hopefully work with us to support, to secure these goals. And the journey, the route as to how we get there will be open to consultation so that we can navigate our journey on some of these challenging priorities. And certainly the route to net zero and a sustainable borough is a challenging journey, so that we can navigate our journey together with our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Mark?
Thank you, Leader. Normally people sort of groan when, we want to talk about finances, particularly at the moment. We live in a pretty hostile environment when it comes to finances, but that makes it even more important that we set out very clearly our priorities. The specific financial priority 5 in the strategic plan, I think speaks for itself. But finance is something that cuts through the whole document itself, because from a financial perspective, we have to be reminded that the strategy itself sets out for us our spending and investment objectives, both revenue and capital, and establishes the non-monetary, the social values that are one side of our value for money equation. So it's important to set them out, and it's important to remind ourselves that we are trying to present here a joined up, holistic set of objectives and strategies. And I just wanted to pull out a couple of examples from a financial point of view. are projects at 69 High Street and the Fairground, where we are working both our social housing and our regeneration strategies in tandem to deliver more than the sum of its parts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Any other speakers? Well, I'll just say a couple of extra things then. And there was also a group of us that wrote cross-party the original manifesto that this is based on, and it was a fairly novel thing in its own right for Liberal Democrats, Greens and Labour to sit together and write a manifesto jointly. That hasn't happened many places in the country, and it was something that we decided to do this time because it was important that if we won in 2023, that we got here with a plan, because in 19 there was an idea and there was some thoughts, but there wasn't the plan that needs to come with that. So what we wanted to do here was make sure that we had something to build upon. And I'm really pleased to see, and not ashamed at all, to be acknowledging that the values of those groups are writ large through this document. It is something that we wanted to achieve in this way for some time. So there are going to be lots of things that are going to be stretch targets in this, and there are going to be areas where perhaps some will accuse us of our reach exceeding our grasp. But there are also things here that if we don't try and decarbonise our social housing and make them better, if we don't try and reach for something different when it comes to sustainable development, if we don't try and do something differently about our economy in this borough, and if we don't try and make sure that we can be a resilient council without government intervention, if we don't try those things, we will definitely fail. And so having those stretch targets is not something that I'm concerned about. They are, I think, necessary for us to even have a hope of getting to where we're going to need to be in the challenging environment that we continue to be in. And just to kind of extend Mark's point and reflect on one of my own back at the beginning of the discussion about collaboration. I mean, there are obviously some financial drivers to collaboration. That's why the government's been looking at things like unitaries and combined authorities. There are clearly drivers from a financial, but there are also non-financial values that are important in this. And at the end of the day, this is, I always described it as a gestalt. It is greater than the sum of its parts. That was always the intention. It was not to just save money. It was to do more and to do different and to do better, to use a bunch of probably very tired cliches. And that is where I hope we will get to as we deepen that partnership going forward. Any final comments before I hand it back to Victoria to close it out? Anything you'd like to say? Anything to add? No? In which case then I'll take us to the recommendations. So in this case, it's to recommend to full council the approval of the adoption of the corporate strategy set out in Appendix 1 and to delegate authority to the AD for Strategy Corporate Services in consultation with myself and the portfolio holder, which is Councillor Keele, to make any necessary minor typographical changes and to finalise the document's design and imagery prior to publication. Can I have all those in favour, please show? Thank you. And also just to note, we have tried our best to make sure Waverley is properly represented in the photography, and I'm really, really hoping that 90% of the debate does not end up being a we need more Cranley or we need more Hazelmere, etc., and that we try and focus on the substance. Let's see if that happens. Right, and on that note, I shall move now to item 10, the Thriving Communities Commissioning Fund, which is with Councillor Mirrlees.
Thank you, Leader. I'm just going to do a quick introduction and then I'm going to pass it over to Sam, who's come here to talk about it. This is the second round of the Thriving Communities Commission, which has been a success over the last 3 years, funding specific projects and activities for those with higher needs, those who are vulnerable and those who experience disadvantage. And we did make an effort to focus as well very much on youth, which I think we've managed to do. As it's proven to work so well, we'll be going again with the same format, but there is one exception. Our decision is to transfer the funding of Hopper and the CAB to the Council's Community Services budget. These are essential high priority services, and by doing this, it means they will receive the funding without having to compete against others if they remained under the Thriving Communities Commission's applications. So with that, I'm going to just ask Sam to talk about it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hughes. Hi, everyone. Just to add to what Kiko has said, I think I'd just like to draw out a couple of points. The first is that we went to overview and scrutiny and they were incredibly supportive of the proposals, and we said to them that we would come back to you with that feedback. As you've been told this evening, we expect the Thriving Communities Fund this time round to be extremely competitive. And that is because of the wider budget challenges that everybody is experiencing. Our criteria will be very much in line with the inclusive borough theme of the corporate strategy. And what will be absolutely vital is that Kika will lead the panel of decision makers, which is a mixture of partners and key officers, to decide which groups and voluntary sector partners are actually meeting those criteria and are extending the services of the council in the spirit of partnership. The reason that the most important thing is, as Kika mentioned, we really need to be in a position to secure the situation with the CAB and Hopper and manage them in a more commissioning model style, which will enable us to work closer with them to deliver objectives that meet the council's requirements, and also give the CAB and Hopper the financial security for the next 3 years to continue to work with us in partnership to help our most vulnerable people. So really we're asking for the fact that you're happy with the second round of the Thriving Communities Fund and the way that we handle it and manage it. And secondly, that you would support us bringing out into a more commissioning model style for the CAB and Hopper to ensure greater management of services. Thank you.
So just a couple of quick questions from me. I mean, the idea that we would not, under the current fund, not support citizens' advice, you know, is bordering ridiculous. I mean, the idea that we're taking it out of that competitive process makes a lot of sense. Can you just give me some assurance that the level of monitoring that we're going to be undertaking on that, because they're effectively out of that process, that's going to be at least the same, if not more? Because obviously we're talking about, you know, this now being a non-competitive fund. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can absolutely confirm that through the commissioning style that we're planning to do, it actually gives us greater control, and the team will be monitoring much more specifically and will be setting out objectives much more specifically as to what we want to achieve through this funding that will actually go beyond the core grant method, if you like, which is actually becoming more and more dated. It's a much better way of ensuring that we're working in partnership and that they are delivering our corporate objectives. So the monitoring will be intense, yes.
Okay, any further questions? Mark?
Listen, while I fully support the proposal, particularly to ring fence citizens' advice and Hopper, I've got to say, I find it quite distasteful, really, to even consider this kind of function as being competitive. The idea of the needy and the vulnerable in this borough having to compete for funding to live dignified lives is really quite disheartening. So I know we're doing our best. We're doing our best for our residents, and we have their full support to do it. But I'm really, really just completely almost ashamed that we live in a society where we even have to go this way.
I think we all are at this point, and we've seen the funding for these sorts of services. I mean, firstly, we've seen them being taken out of state provision in the first place, which is, you know, the biggest change, and then the ever decreasing pot to fund what is broadly an increasing demand for these services. So I'll bring in Janet, and then Sam, I will obviously let you come back.
Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to say I'm really delighted to hear about this change in this commissioning fund, because this new arrangement is going to deliver a longer term relationship with shared targets and objectives to provide services including financial inclusion, housing advice, homelessness referrals, and regular monitoring of actions and outcomes. And it can only really help us know our people better and more thoroughly. So I'm really pleased to hear this.
And one of the things also, this will end up probably being Kika and I progressing as well, is that there's also support being provided to citizens' advice from the 4 principal towns and parishes within Waverley. And at the moment, that is not done in a particularly joined up way, and it's certainly uneven based on the population. And there's obviously a clear desire to see, physical access to these services in all 4 parts of in all 4 major settlements, basically. So we do need, I think, to re-engage with Farnham, Godalming, Cranley and Hazelmere just to try and coordinate a bit better about what people are doing. So, for example, Godalming Town Council has a formal SLA with citizens' advice as well. We need to make sure that what we're doing at the borough level doesn't conflict with that, and equally that we talk to the other towns and parishes about how they're doing this modelling too. I've got Paul and then Mark again. Yeah.
Let me just state the obvious. Without the CAB, Waverley would have an awful lot more work to do. God bless the CAB.
It shouldn't be necessary. I think it's going back to my original point. I mean, this is one of those few times where I will absolutely say these things should be provided by the state properly and funded properly and centrally, and we shouldn't be reliant upon voluntary organisations effectively to run these sorts of services. They do a fantastic job, but they should not be in that position. Mark.
Sorry, Leader, I just wanted to join this discussion up with the discussion we had at the last council about the voluntary Band H contributions, and I would love to see the Band H householders familiarising themselves with the problems that the recipients of our Communities Fund money receive, and volunteering to top up this fund in particular.
Yes, I mean, I think it's a hope of many of us here that we're able to start putting up, ideally something equivalent to the Thriving Communities Fund in terms of what that Band H pot generates. But obviously, we'll have to see how that goes. But I share your aspirations for that. Kika, and then I'll bring back Sam.
Thank you. Just to say, last time, with the amount of people who applied, I think we managed to scrape through. The people who didn't get the funding, I think it was very reasonable that they didn't get the funding. They weren't going to sink. We were very careful to make sure that if the application was worthwhile, that we managed to somehow squeeze them in and give them a reasonable amount of money. And it did vary. I mean, I will say, looking back on it, I remember it went from an amazing organisation for mentoring, which we know, and I think mentoring is one of the best things that you can do for people who've fallen through the net, to another organisation which worked with children and young people, looking after animals and doing horticulture, one child for the first time in her life managed to speak a word, and that was when she was there and 12 years old. And then down to a little cafe who, is so good in looking after people who are disadvantaged and homeless, who came in and applied for a day trip to the seaside. And I think that I found really just wonderful that we were able to do all those things. But I'm aware now that we are probably going to have a lot of people asking for a lot more. So yeah, I hope that we can find something, and I hope again, as Councillor Mark Merriweather said, that those people who are so well off and so lucky, and I don't resent them at all, but that it'd be lovely if they thought perhaps they could, benefit these people too. Thanks.
Sure, at some point there will be a renewed appeal to the new government to consider things like council tax ban changes and reforms to the tax system that would enable us to do things very differently than is currently being proposed. Sam.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your support. I think going back to what Councillor Merriweather says, it's a sad reality. I do think there is a challenge to us to enable the voluntary sector to work collaboratively, which is very hard when they are facing each other as competitors now. So that is something that we're going to have to really culturally try to move forward on. And it is not easy to bridge that gap for them, because there is also the fact that we want to support the voluntary sector itself. So there are two strands to that because they do fantastic work. So I think, as Kika said, our challenge this time is to ensure that we can support the smaller as well as the larger, to encourage a business model in a sector that is close to breaking and at the greatest cost of living crisis the country has seen for a long time. So it's going to be fun. That, in a nutshell, it's going to be extremely difficult, but we're up for it. And the most important thing is to make sure that the people of Waverley and the communities of Waverley are helped as best we can. So thank you for your support in that.
Here on all of that. Right, so minor change to the report. So there's a minor error in paragraph 13.1 which refers to this being a key decision, which it's not. That's a typographical error, so that's just for noting. Any further speakers before I move to the recommendations? Seeing none, the recommendation is set out in the report, agenda item 10, together with the additional recommendation. Can I have all those in favour, please show? Thank you very much indeed, everyone. Then moving on then to item 11, the Equalities, Diversity and Inclusion Policy, which is also with Councillor Muralys.
I have to say, we've just had a really good session just before our meeting this evening. And I think people, I hope, will have learned from it. It was very interesting, and there was a lot of work that we can do for ourselves. So that was great. So in terms of this policy, all I can say is I think it works very well. I don't know if Jenny's here. Somebody wants to talk about it? No. But I just recommend it that I recommend it to us to take on board, and I hope that we are happy with it. I think it's very good.
Thank you, Kika. Victoria.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Councillor Muralys and the team for bringing this policy forward. I welcome its adoption, and I think the fact that it sets out some key statements of how we wish to act as an organisation is really important. I do think there's more we can do to improve equalities, diversity and inclusion within our own organisation. For example, there are things we could do around how we arrange our meetings and our training and our processes to ensure that we are as inclusive as we can be to as many people as possible. Sometimes we have our hands tied by the law. So, for example, being able to hold remote formal meetings that could benefit those with disabilities and caring responsibilities and other exceptional circumstances is currently not allowed. In my view, these are areas that we should be lobbying for legislative change on. So, spoiler alert, I will be bringing a motion to Council next week to seek support for this. In other areas, we are in charge of our own destiny, like times of meetings, considering locations, remote participation where we're able to, for example. I call upon us to be bold and inclusive in our approach and widening participation, not just for those already in roles as staff or as members, but those who may wish to work for us in the future and those who may wish to stand for council in the future. Thank you.
There's also that wider point, I think, about retaining and attracting new staff and new members of this council, is making it as accessible as possible. And certainly organisations that are not forward thinking on this do struggle to recruit and retain at the moment. That's just an economic reality. And I think it's something that when we look at our recruitment and retention risks as an authority as well, it's something that we have to take seriously in that regard. The only other point I'm going to make is that it's certainly also my hope that a lot of this is internal about how we work as a council, but keeping in mind that quite a lot of our staff and also us as members, we're front facing as well. And so this really is about also how we should be engaging with our residents, with our tenants, and making sure that we factor all of this into all of the types of work we're doing, whether it be treating different departments and different people in the council this way, or indeed the people that we're actually serving. So hopefully we can take it on board in that way. And this is always a continuously evolving environment, frankly, EDI. That's without the Herald completely confusing what the acronym is in a particularly amusing way, as they did last week. Was it electronic digital data integration or something, which even a quick Google, I'm sure, would have corrected. But any further comments? Otherwise, I'll bring it to the recommendations. Okay, seeing none, the recommendations are set out in your report, agenda item 11. All those please in favour, please show. Thank you very much indeed. Moving then on to item 12, the Climate Change and Sustainability Strategy 2024 and the CNAP annual update. It's with Councillor Williams.
Okay, yeah, it's pronouncing the word CNAP. That's actually represents. It's a bit of a challenge, yeah, and it's So it's that time of year again for the annual update of the Climate Change and Sustainability Strategy and our Carbon Neutrality Action Plan. It is the fourth version of the CNAP that has been produced. And it is an organic document that needs constantly changing and updating by its very nature. And the main change this year really has been very much to sharpen the areas of focus in Waverley Borough Council's efforts to reduce our own carbon emissions, alongside our wider work and communications strategy. And in doing so, we've highlighted 9 key areas of activity that between them comprise 93% of Waverley's total emissions. Notably, waste disposal on about 34%, the leisure centres and the vehicle fleet of Waverley and its contractors. There remains the challenge of decarbonising our housing stock. And I was very privileged recently to see some of the amazing work of our housing team referred to earlier by Janet, both in retrofitting some of our older and draftier social housing, but also the new build Site C, new high-spec, comfortable and energy efficient homes for our Waverley tenants, with plenty of learning in that process, in the process that we've gone through, both in relation to the retrofits of 7 homes and in relation to the improvement in the sustainability of each iteration of the Oxford development, with plenty of learning that ensures that in future we can make optimal use of the funding as it becomes available to provide better, warmer and energy efficient homes. And we've now got an absolutely first-rate energy efficiency lead within our housing services team, who can work with our excellent sustainability team to secure further tranches of funding from the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, now that we have a much greater awareness of the state of our social housing stock. And I'm absolutely convinced that we're on track and we are doing everything we can, but it is a challenge. Some of the changes we have to make will take time, and our excellent sustainability team know what to do. And I'd like at this point to thank Delma and the team for the enormously hard work that they have put in. And securing funding for our net zero trajectory is our biggest challenge. Now, we've been enormously successful in attracting funds through bids and grants and so on. And we can still hope that the new government, because it does take climate change seriously, unlike the last one, will see the merit in providing carefully considered and ring-fenced funding for local authorities to be trailblazers for the UK's net zero trajectory. But where there is an opportunity for bid funding, because that's the landscape in which we operate, I think we can be sure that our team is well equipped not only to write successful bids, but also to obtain the most effective use of the funding we secure to improve the energy efficiency of our buildings, and the warmth and comfort of our social housing and the other measures that we've got to take in order to get our own house in order and be a trailblazer for the wider community in terms of doing our bit to support the climate change agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'll do the silly bit first. CNAP is definitely a much better acronym than it was for 4 days in 2019, where officers had not clocked that it was the Carbon Reduction Action Plan. So that was a fun 4 days. So CNAP is much better than it was. But in all seriousness, it has come an immense distance in that sort of 4 or 5 years. I mean, we're now in a position where we actually do have a proper action plan for all of these very serious things. We have attracted so much bid money, which we just never have dreamed of being able to get, frankly, when we kicked off this initiative back in 19. So we really are trying, I think, to put our money where our mouth is in terms of deliverables here. Just in terms of the housing side, I mean, what we have got at this point is, I hope by the end of sort of next year, we're in the position where the learning that we've had on some of the refits, particularly where the relatively cheap components of that, so for example, the external and external insulation, will have that coupled with stock condition survey data. So we will actually be able to ask the government for, we'll have an idea as to how much the sort of sum total of that bill is to really deliver the most value in terms of insulation for our residents. But in the meantime, building things like Site C, making sure things like Cranley Leisure Centre happen and making that a real thing. These are the sorts of things that are going to really materially assist our trajectory to net zero, which, as I said, with the corporate strategy, is absolutely a stretch target. But if we haven't even tried, we definitely will not hit that. So this is an area where I always expect the risk to be red. I always expect the task to be hard. And, our officers are doing a fantastic job to get this done under, incredibly difficult circumstances and, not on a shoestring, but with not as much resource, I think, as we would like to give in a different scenario. Any further comments from anybody? Paul?
Well, just simply our experience in retrofitting and renovating properties, certainly in Oxford Ridge, means that we maintain tenant communities. These things can be done in situ, and that is really an important thing. Yeah, you can build new houses somewhere, but that puts stress and strain, and renovating and retrofitting is, although expensive, cheaper than building new houses.
And again, why we possibly need to ask the new government about their long-term thinking on right to buy, because there's only so much we can really be doing without, the stock continually draining from our own account. Any final comments on CNAP? Anything else you'd like to add, Steve, before I bring it to Rec?
Only just to put flesh on the bones of what you were saying, Paul. 300,000 is what we've actually put into the Climate Change Reserve Fund, and the additional external funding required, as it shows in Appendix 4, is 4.5 million, which I think is pretty good value for money, apart from anything else.
Yes, and a very clear table in Annex 4. Yes, 4.617 million in for 300 over the course of the last few years. It's a fantastic achievement, and don't get me wrong, there are always issues about having to bid competitively for this sort of money. It means that everybody's having to put resources into bidding and various inefficiencies that go into that. But frankly, right now we seem to be pretty good at it. So there's a certain level of the win we just got to take in the situation that we're in. Okay, any further comments? Otherwise, I'll bring it to a close. Okay, can I have all those in favour of the recommendations as set out in report agenda item 12? All those in favour? Thank you very much indeed. Moving then on to item 13, complaints to the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman and Housing Ombudsman Service about Waverley's services. In the absence of a portfolio holder for customer services, which we will have a new one probably by next Tuesday, just want to have a little bit of a discussion about this. Obviously, we get complaints like every local authority, and we have to process them. There are a number of different types of complaints that we get, and I think it's incumbent upon us to consider a few things in that. Firstly, each complaint is absolutely not equal. And certainly when you're looking at complaints as a whole, and item 14 talks about that in terms of the areas that we deal with complaints and the sorts of complaints. I do kind of want to break it down into different types of issues. So you've obviously got issues with, you know, planning and things like that, additional services, non-statutory services that we're providing residents. We also have obviously a fair number in housing. People in my position will often sit here and go, well, that's actually a small number of complaints compared to the grand total of social housing that we have. And you could sit here and do that. But at the end of the day, those complaints are about people's homes, and we do need to take them very seriously. Strangely, I mean, if I were doing this in a Guildford meeting right now, I'd be having to declare an interest, because I've just gone through this process with my mother, who lives in social housing in Guildford, and having had 3 contractors missed, have had to go through that in an anonymous way, because obviously I don't want to be causing issues in Guildford, to go through that process with her about how she actually then gets the service done. And this isn't in, you know, the other side of the country. This is over the road, basically, in Guildford. So where we've got issues and it's involving somebody's home and the safety of them and their family and things like that, there are going to be emotive issues in these complaints, and we do need to make sure that they're dealt with properly and reasonably. So can I thank the team here, the complaints team, who have obviously done a fantastic job in dealing with what was a backlog for a long time, but also in dealing with the kind of depth of some of these issues. I'll be proposing in the next item 14 a new task and finish group to be led by the new portfolio holder when they're appointed next week, to form a group with residents, the tenants panel, and a few other stakeholders to get into the weeds of some of the issues, particularly in the housing service. We've obviously done a little bit of that from the housing perspective, but as we've got a fresh pair of eyes to the exec from next week, who's not come into any of this with any bias, they can have a look at this with tenants and residents to see if there's anything that we can improve upon. I mean, I'm sure there will be trends, and I'm sure there'll be areas that continually improve. There is absolutely no chance that any council is ever going to get this perfectly, and I would be very suspicious of any council that said it was. So that's kind of where I'm intending to take that. There will always be some level of complaint. It is impossible in a local authority context, particularly with all the funding and other issues that we're in, to ever be 100% perfect. And again, if we were, I would assume that would mean something is wrong with our complaints process, or we'd shut down the email box or turned off the phones or something like that. It would probably indicate that kind of fail. So I will probably I will add an additional recommendation to item 14. But are there any comments on item 13 before I move any further? Nope. Okay. In terms of item 13, then, the recommendation set out in the report, agenda item 13, agreed. Thank you. And then in item 14, which is where I will add this additional recommendation, bear with me one moment. So you've got the table of data there. And again, housing services is by far and away the largest number in terms of the serious issues. So I will be adding a recommendation that the new portfolio holder for customer services and IT will lead a task and finish group of the executive with residents, tenants panel and other stakeholders as appropriate to do a more in-depth review of the complaints in regards to housing services. Any comments on item 14? In which case, can I have all those in favour of the additional, of the paper recommendation and the additional recommendation? Thank you very much, everyone. And yeah. My apologies. Okay, and my apologies. There is also a requirement to propose an additional recommendation to delegate to me in consultation with the monitoring officer, because at the moment I'm the complaints portfolio holder pro tem. To agree with the monitoring officer to prepare a response following the review of the council's self-assessment of its compliance with the Housing Ombudsman Complaint Handling Code. So that's the additional recommendation, as well as my additional recommendation from the floor. Can I have all those in favour? Thank you very much, everyone. And then, thank you, Rochelle. We're then on to the final item, item 15, which is the provision of Unison staff backfill. One of the jobs I have here that is actually one of my favourite ones because it's an interesting challenge. I'm somebody who's had to deal with defence unions. I'm in the position of being the employer, effectively, when it comes to the council's duties. And having some of the engagements that we've had with staff from the union has been incredibly informative, particularly when it comes to the collaboration, and has been something that we've been keen to support going forward. We want to make sure that those who work with the union are able to do that to the most full that they can. A weird parallel for me here as a member of the council, we are effectively volunteers with some level of allowance. Somebody said to me the other day, if I won a couple of £1 million, I wouldn't know what to do. And I'm pretty sure I could fill my time at least 3 times over if I didn't have to do a day job as well. And one of the things I think we have to take into account, particularly when we're working with the unions, is making sure that they have enough time to actually do their union work and to represent their members in a constructive way. The permanent version of this is not something we're discussing here. That will be for the budget discussions that will come forward in the next few weeks. What we're doing here is a provision of Unison staff backfill for the remainder of this financial year, so that we can evaluate as to whether that's been a sensible approach going forward with proper information. So what I'm proposing here is that we're effectively enabling the union to do their job so that we can continue the constructive engagements that we've had. I cannot stress how important those discussions are now, let alone with further collaboration and further issues from central government funding and all of the other things that are likely to come. These relationships are important that the trust is built. And I would like to show our support to the union and to staff in that process going forward in a constructive way. Any speakers? Kika.
I know we discussed this earlier about it, and I know that I brought up the idea that I felt that the union should be paying for some of this, and I wondered if anybody had actually gone and found that out, whether that was considered, because I think what we brought up, which I thought was quite important, was the fact that you have a conflict of interest if you find yourself in a position where there is a problem with the unions. So I just wanted to, although I'm very happy, I understand that we have a situation where we do need to work well with unions, that we have a lot going on in this council, particularly with working with Guildford as well, and the change of the staff and all the rest of it. But I just wanted to make sure that we were in a position where people understood that that was okay, because it did strike me, as I said before, that I'm not sure that we should be paying for the work that the Unison, I think is quite a wealthy union, should be paying some of. But I just wanted to find out whether you managed to look into that. Thanks.
We did ask them, and their response was no. And that is a response that will feed into whether we do the permanent version of this. Obviously, we have a short-term thing to deal with right now, but that is a discussion that I want to renew with the union, because a flat-out no was not constructive as far as I'm concerned. I do want to know a little bit more about the union, the wider union's finances, as to whether that no is justified or not. In terms of the provision for the rest of this financial year, I think that's something that we can reasonably support, but that is information that I would need more about before supporting the permanent version of this backfill. In terms of the conflict of interest, we also raised that as well. Their view was that this is an accepted practice, and that effectively it's an acknowledged, not a conflict. I think from those of us outside, there is a kind of gut reaction that you kind of feel beholden to the employer to provide that backfill, and that's the reason you can do the job. And I think instinctively it does feel like a conflict, but they tell us that it's an acknowledged practice. It will never quite sit correctly with me. I have to say there's no amount of conversation that's going to alleviate that completely. But for right now, I'm keen to see whether making sure the union have the time to do the job in the way that they would like and I would like would help our relations, particularly with what's happening going forward. But I will need more information to support the permanent version of this, but we're not talking about that today. Okay. Mark.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I shared Councillor Mirrlees's concerns, and I do think there is still a conversation to be had with the union. But you know, we must remember that the welfare of our staff, our officers, particularly in the current climate, regardless of whether there's collaboration going on, is vital. We live in a world where we are struggling to hire skilled, qualified staff at any price in certain parts of the organisation. And that puts additional pressures on our officers through no fault of our own, through no fault of theirs. And we should support them as best we can whilst having responsible and constructive conversations with the union. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? My apologies, just taking some advice on something that I need to address in a moment. So just to be clear, the conversation I am already continuing the conversation with the union. They are aware that I have that open question with them in regards to the permanent version of this funding. It's something that Pedro and I have discussed with them. Yeah, so this is an ongoing discussion on that line in accordance with the discussion that the executive had previously had on the subject. Are there any further comments on this item? Okay, in which case, can I have all those in favour of the recommendations as set out in agenda item 15? Thank you. I'm just going to quickly go back to something just to make sure we have definitely covered it properly on item 14. As mentioned, I've created a task and finish group. There is a section of the recommendations. The executive is also asked to review the council's self-assessment of its compliance with the Housing Ombudsman's complaint handling code and provide a response for publication on the Waverley website as a requirement of that code. And just to be clear, it's my intention for that task and finish group to do that job and report back to the executive in full. That is not me skipping over the item. That's me delegating it so it can be done properly and brought back to the executive for review. Just want to be clear from your side, you're content with that approach. Thank you. In which case, are there any queries with that interpretation of the task and finish group? In which case, seeing none, I shall now close the meeting at 20:29. Thank you.